Harry, I just continue to come back to, before I forget, if anybody doesn't have this re-memoir, as your good friend Mel Brooks
Yeah.
titled it, it's just a fascinating look into your life. You have so many stories like this one you shared here about Bob Elliott, but so many stories and the fascinating people that you've met. You have a story in here. It's on page 46, and the title of it is "It's in Your Face," and it's regarding John Scarne and President Hoover. I don't even want to say anything. I'll just tell us, what is this about? What's this?
You know, it's interesting. You have to understand something, Rudy. As time goes by, so many things are going out of my mind now. And I think I mentioned to you, my one good eye ain't that good anymore. It's hard for me to read my own stuff, even with I always have. I want to show you 2 magnifying glasses.
Oh my God.
Handy. You know, I got to do this.
Wow.
You know,
yeah.
So you know, having trouble reading it, but I remember. But things are going out of my mind. What's your name again? All right. Sometimes I think I'm being funny, not really. But really, a lot of things are going out of my mind, but some things stick to it. Now, I couldn't read it. I can't see it, but I remember that quite well. John Scarne and I became pretty good friends. He was old enough to be my father, you know, but we became good friends. He was a little bit of a strange character. I can tell you stories about him. But I do remember that when you say President Hoover, it was ex-president. You know, I'm old, but not that old, you know. So I don't know how long it had been at that time when he was not a president anymore. But it was at some sort of gathering, some kind of political thing. I can't remember why John Scarne was there. I was there because I was with John, that he brought me. Why he was there, that went out of my mind. And I do remember Hoover was there for a reason. He was still into politics, obviously. And he was walking around shaking, not everybody's hand. I think I wrote this, you know, certain people. He was, you know, addressing, saying hello and shaking hands. Somebody schlepped dragged John Scarne over to Hoover, thinking that Hoover would enjoy seeing a card trick. Why this person thought that, I have no idea. It's not something I ever would have thought of. I'm going to ask the ex-president to see a card trick. I mean, give me a break, you know? So anyway, and Hoover, I guess, was a very nice person. When this man brought John Scarne over, he said, "Oh, Mr. President, I want you to meet Mr. John Scarne, one of the best card magicians ever. He'd like to show you a trick." I remember there are certain things that, you know, stick in your mind. I remember Hoover rolling his eyes. Oh, no, you know, oh, God. But he was a nice man. He said, "Okay, well, what I do remember, I don't remember the end result, but I remember John, I could tell you stories about it, but I think there was something a little amiss, you know. He didn't think too clearly about certain things, and this is a good example. He did one of his favorite tricks, which was card in mouth. You know, he had a card selected. It was very good. The card was apparently lost in the deck. Really, you never saw him fold in palm, which he did into quarters, the card into his mouth. What he did do, it's funny, what just came to mind, he would say, it's already in his mouth. It's folded into quarters. And he would say, "Watch this." Why? He was trying to say, "Watch this." He's got a goddamn folded card in his mouth. He's saying, "Watch this." He didn't realize that it sounds unnatural, for God's sakes. You know, he wanted to say, "Watch this." Yeah, fine. But that's not the same as "watch this." So anyway, "Watch this." And he would tap himself on the shoulder. I don't remember, make a magical gesture and slowly open his mouth. And out comes the card folded. It's only the back, you see. He would take the card, open it so the back is toward the spectator. And this is the point. He'd say, "Mr. President, what was your card?" "The 5 of clubs." "Watch." And he would turn it over. It was a 5, and he would snap it.
Oh,
and he did that. And the saliva from the card flew into President Hoover's face. I was standing there seeing this. Oh, my God. Now, as I said before, I don't remember the end result. I think Hoover did something like this and rolled his eyes again and just walked away. That's one of my John Scarne story time. Oh, Jesus. You're reminding me of things that I walked into the back of Tannen's. I used to let certain people go to the back rather than stay in front. I walk in the back, and what I see is John Scarne holding Richard Himber by the shirt and lifting him up against the wall and banging him against the wall, just like I saw Bob Elliott do with that goddamn bellhop at the Roosevelt Hotel. I don't remember why, but John had gotten angry at Richard Himber for some reason. And Richard Himber, I don't know if you know him or if many of the people listening now would know him. Richard Himber was known to the public. He was a musician. He was a band leader, and a pretty popular band leader. He either wrote a song or made it popular, or it was a theme song called It Isn't Fair, which was a very popular song at the time, but he was also into magic, okay? And he was a good friend of mine. He did very good things for me, which I can talk about if you want. I may have already done so. He was a very well-known person. Everybody knew, everybody that was important knew Richard Himber. They knew who he was. And he was able to talk to anybody. Richard Himber was the kind of person you could not get him out of your hair without getting him out of your hair. You couldn't say, leave me alone, don't bother. You couldn't. He was on top of you. I could tell. He did that with that Sullivan. He did that with Billy Reed of Billy Reed's Little Club, where he got me the job. I mean, he did a lot of good things for me. So anyway, when I walk in the back and I see John Scarne holding him and he had his arm back like this, he was going to punch him. I said, John, leave him alone. This is a friend. What are you doing? And of course, he let him go. And I said, well, what? He told me why. I've forgotten why. But at least I saved him from, if John was going to do it, punching him. He was going to punch him in the face. Wow. So that's one of my John Scarne. There were things with John. This is another thing. This is the last thing I'll tell you that comes to mind. We're in Fall River, New Jersey, where I think John Scarne lived. I'm not sure. He had invited me and told me to bring any magicians I wanted to. I'm thinking of the people I had with me: Eddie Balducci, Bill Simon, Francis Carlisle. I don't know if you know those names or people listening.
Sure, absolutely.
Know those names, but they were people I knew. At that time they were well known. I think well known. Anyway, and a couple other people. He had invited us because he was doing a performance at a nightclub in Fall River, New Jersey. Okay, he had a special table for us. There was, I don't know, 6 or 7 of us sitting at the table. He comes out, and Rudy, I don't know how to explain this, and I don't know why. It was terrible. He got no reaction. People kept talking to each other while he was working. He's a good magician, He was getting, nobody was paying attention. I don't know if they were drunk or what. I have no concept. I don't remember that, but it was terrible. There were no applause when he got off. Now, here's the thing I'm talking about John had a little thing in his mind that was kind of strange. He says good night and he walks off. A few minutes later, he comes out, he walks over to our table and he says, hands on hips. And he says, what'd you think of that, guys? That's what he said. So we all said, oh, it was great. I mean, that's what he said after this terrible performance. So that was John Scarne. There were other things, but he was doing magic that he said silly things. But it was a heck of a con man. Mm. And I spent so much time with him.
How did he pass away?
I don't remember that. I don't remember how old he was. I remember somebody calling me and they said my name is, and they said John Scarne's real name, which I don't remember, was a long Italian name starting with Scarn. And John had shortened it, to John Scarne. Or Scarnova, it was a long Italian name, which I had never heard until this person called me and said, oh, this is Mr. And he says this name. And I say, who? And he says, oh, John Scarne's. Then he told me, I forgot, his brother or whatever. But that was the only time I heard. I didn't know Scarne was not his, legitimate long name.
Mhm.
which I don't blame him for changing. It was much easier to remember, than the long Italian name. But what year it was, Rudy, what he died from, out of my mind.
Mm. Yeah, well, you've seen so many people come and go. I'm sure it's hard to.
Oh, God, you have no idea lately. When I wrote Before I Forget, and I haven't looked at the date, I think it was 10, 12 years ago. My memory, now when I say my memory, I don't mean the things I did on stage. I don't mean performance memory. That I can still do when I apply my systems. I'm talking about life in general. When I wrote that book, I still remember these things that I talked about.
Mhm.
Now, so many have gone right out of my mind.
Mhm.
Just disappeared.
Yeah.
Uh, the other couple of weeks ago, at my kitchen here, the sink water was not going, was not draining fast enough. Okay, it would be this much water when I was doing the dishes, whatever,
Mhm.
washing my hands, this much, and it went on for a couple of weeks. But it wasn't that bad. After a while, it took a long time. I would go do something else. When I came back and looked, the water was out, but it was bothering me. So I was going to call my son to say, to get a plumber. What happened there, I'm telling you these stories, they're really ridiculous, but you can always edit them out, Rudy.
I love it.
Uh, I say to my son and my daughter-in-law, they send two cleaning girls who are very good for the last few years, once a month, once every 3 weeks. They send them to my house to clean up for me, change the sheets and in my bed and things like that. Why do I mention them? They were here. I'm going back about 2 weeks ago. They're here, and after they left, I'm back at my sink, and I'm washing a dish or something, and all of a sudden the water is going down normally. I say, what the heck? Maybe one of these girls, her name is Giuliani, maybe she's a plumber. I don't know what the heck. All of a sudden, right after they left, the water is going down normally. So I mentioned it to my son. I started to talk to my son. I say, is Giuliani he says, what are you talking about, Dad? I said, I tell him the story that's in. He said, Dad, the garbage disposal switch. I said, what? Now I'm telling you this story about things going out of my mind. At my sink, there are two switches. Right here, I don't know if you can see me doing this, just that much away from my eye, okay? Two switches. The one on the right is a light, a strong light bulb on the ceiling. The one on the left is a garbage disposal switch that I used all the time that I've been living in this house. That's about 7 years or 6 years. It went completely out of my mind. That's why I'm telling you the story. There it is. I see the switches and I'm worried about the water not going down. All it is you turn that on and it drags anything that's stuck in the drain, disposes it. That's the whole point. It went completely out of my mind. And when my son told me, he said, oh my God. And I told him, forgive me, Bobby, it just went out of my mind. So I'm assuming it's a sign of old age. Maybe it's only me, but those are the things that have been happening lately. So some of the things that I say to you, I don't remember when he died. I don't remember. They just went out of my mind. A guy called me, it's got to be about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and said, oh, Norman Lear is doing a thing on Netflix, and I think he might mention your name. I said, who the hell is Norman Lear? Norman Lear was a friend of mine. Norman Lear is was a very popular movie director. Mm-hmm. And we were friends. I met him, I guess, through Mel Brooks, because it was through Mel that I met so many people in the movie industry, and we became good friends. Norman Lear would say to me every time. I remember once we went out to watch Estelle, Carl Reiner's wife wanted to be a singer, and she was appearing somewhere singing, and we all friends of Carl Reiner and Mel, people like that, big names like Norman Lear from the movie industry. And I came with Mel, of course, and Carl to watch Estelle sing and work. And I was introduced to Norman Lear. And after that, we met quite often. And he always said, Harry, when you're in town, give me a call. Love to have dinner, blah, blah, blah. This was Norman Lear, like I say, a well-known, at least at that time. Now, 2 weeks ago, somebody, oh, Norman, and I said, Norman Lear, who's that? It just went out of my mind until I hung up. When I hung up, I said, oh my God, Norman Lear, he was an old friend of mine.
Wow.
I was talking to my son, Bobby. I mentioned this name before. And he, for some reason, mentioned Dennis Marks. And I said, hon, I'm sorry. Jesus, I said, who the hell is Dennis Marks? And he said, Dad, the guy, his daughter, Amanda Marks, they used to come to our house in Connecticut to go swimming in the pool with us. Dennis Marks wrote this whole article. He was the one that I mentioned before, I think I did, who said Harry Lorayne is probably the greatest card teacher, writer in magic ever in the history of magic. And I said, who the heck? It went completely out of my mind. But then when I think of it, oh my God, the whole thing comes back. He used to come to my house. He lived in the New York area for all those years. Then he moved to LA. And every time I was in Los Angeles, he would drive me around to where I had to go. He was my chauffeur, for God's sakes. And when Bobby said it to me a few weeks ago, I couldn't think of that as much.
Wow.
So,
well, I'll tell you, Gary, if you ever, maybe one day you'll forget my name. I will never forget you, ever. You are one of the most amazing people I've
ever. Please don't, Henry.